It's sunny where I am. Not sure if it's sunny where you are, but I always enjoy seeing it this time of year. So welcome back, everybody, and we'll get started. So today's meeting is an opportunity for us to take all of this pre-work we've been doing and have a discussion about these draft recommendations that I know everyone's teams have worked really hard on. And the hope is that we're going to end with a decision on what we want to solicit educator preparation programs and their input and public input on. And just as a reminder, we are an advisory body to Governor Kotek, and our recommendations will be reviewed by the Teacher Standards and Practices Commission as well. So just to reiterate, the TSPC is the actual rulemaking body to translate the recommendations we provide into those rules and standards. So also as a reminder to ground our conversation and to frame our conversation today, that we want to recommit to our community agreements. I think Alex is going to put those in the chat. And those were those community agreements that we adopted our first meeting on September 25th. And one in particular that I think it's important to highlight is number 3. We will be self-aware of the shared space we are in and create space for those whose voices we may not have heard. I know this is a group that has so much to offer and so much expertise to provide, but we want to make sure that sometimes we step back or lean back so others can lean forward and provide their voice. So being self-monitoring of our own voice and time we're taking is really helpful. So thank you for that commitment to those shared principles. With that, I'll hand it over to Rhonda.
Thanks, Susan. I'm really excited for us to have the opportunity to dive into these recommendations that, as Susan said, it's clear that each of the subcommittees really put a lot of effort and work into, and saw such good alignment with the Oregon Literacy Framework. And I'm excited to talk about these initial recommendations. We want to take some time today to create space for conversation about the other sections that we were not involved in. So we will be doing that. Hopefully you've had a chance to pre-read those recommendations that were sent out on Monday, and that you've been able to kind of familiarize yourself with those other sections. So to create kind of a feedback loop, between each of the 3 groups, we're going to have some time to ask questions about each section and each group's recommendations. But before we dive into that, we did have 3 people fill out the optional survey. So I wanted to highlight a few things that came up across all 3 regarding overall comments about the entire document, which in a minute, I'll tell you one of those things that came back with all 3. All 3 said that it was really long and that there was a need for consistency in language and structure across the sections. So really some refinement of the way the language works needs to happen before we're ready to send it out. 2 also said that there were multiple areas of redundancy, and hopefully you noticed that we had some, which I think is a great thing. We all knew there were some really important things that we wanted, but they're in several different sections, so we'll need to reconcile those redundancies. And all 3 also said a need to polish the recommendations before we release them for public comment. We'll just give a really quick time frame here. Are there any other comments that you thought overall across all of them before we dive into the separate sections? Anita?
Just that since the original description was that they would be based on long-term research, we would need verification of that.
Thank you. Yes, I forgot to mention that one. Wayne?
Yes. I wonder if you need an editor that the council can look at to, I see those same things, a lot of redundancy, a lot of statements that are not really in program standard form. A lot of, just a lot of issues before they're polished. And I really would recommend that you have an editor that gives it a consistent voice, consistent style before this is handed over to TSPC. TSPC is not going to be putting together a work group. You are the work group. You are the people putting the standard together. So that's my recommendation anyway.
Thank you, Wayne. That goes right along with that. Dr. Esparza Brown, did you have something else you wanted to add?
No, I think that's a really good point. I'm not on mute, surprising. About a common voice and really looking at the structure of it and the redundancies. Yeah, totally agree.
Rep. Wright.
Is this appropriate, Dr. Fritz, to bring up handwriting at this point?
I think maybe that would be better served in one of the other sections. Maybe you can bring that up when we talk about our section. Okay, so if no other overall comments, we always start with group 1. So this time we're going to work backwards and we're going to start with group 3. And that group is core instruction and assessment and also reaching all learners. That included Jennifer Whitten, Ben Cannon, Heidi Brown, Senator Dimbro, Wayne Strickland, Sarah Spencer. Is there anyone from group 3 that would like to share any context before we open it up for questions from other council members?
I can share. Thanks, Heidi. So we had a lot of good conversations in our group about sort of just ideas of making sure, really leaning into the framework, I would say, and that value of making sure that understanding that all children deserve deserve access to their high quality core instruction. So that was a real grounding idea. And then also the framework of being a critical consumer as well of high quality curriculum content. I think one area that I was wondering about is if we have made some recommendations on merging the dyslexia with it. Our section 8 was about all student belonging. And so where are those being merged in? How are we articulating that? I think for a new teacher standards, not necessarily knowing the details about it, but knowing that there is a process and that process. So I don't think that we have to have the expectation that they're going through the process, because that's usually handled by an intervention or academic coach, but that there's an understanding of the process in there. So I didn't really prepare much else, but if there's any other context that the group would like to add, just jump right in.
Okay, if there's no other comments from the group 3 folks, then we can open that up for questions. Rep.
I'm
Wright,
sorry.
did you?
Could
Yeah.
you elaborate on which group? I mean, the title, is this reaching for all learners? Is that where we're at?
Yeah, we were the core curriculum and assessment practices, and then the section 8, which was reaching all learners. And there was a lot in that section to unpack with multilingual learners, students, dyslexia, students with disabilities. So there was quite a bit that our group might want to go back and review in that section. It was hard to scale down what to add.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought of looking at, especially that core instruction and assessment, that is a huge piece too. And I wondered about including anything about multi-tiered systems of support within there, and that relating that to assessment and how that informs instruction. I was wondering if that was something your group had thought about at all.
We had a part in there, I think that should still be in there, that understanding that all students should have access to the core content, but knowing that at times with data and observations, students may need other support not served within the core. But if maybe we need to articulate a little more that the system begins at the tier 1 with core instruction, and then with everyone attending parts of that, but knowing that some need support in some areas.
Tanas, did you have a comment on that too?
I did have a comment on that too. I had also made notes for myself and wondered if number 2 under skills, where it says plan for and implement differentiated instruction, could be elaborated just a tiny bit more to incorporate multi-tiered systems of support. Another note that I made, I don't know if it would maybe belong in dispositions or dispositions and knowledge, would be something about expecting students within a class to have a range of skills from far below to far above their grade level curriculum. I was really thinking through the lens of intermediate grade teachers who still have beginning readers, and needing disposition and knowledge and skills around expecting that and knowing what to do as a classroom teacher, and not expecting that to be somebody else's responsibility.
Thank you. That's a good point. Anita, did you have a comment on that section too?
You're on mute.
You're muted, Anita.
I was looking at it through the lens of teaching university courses, and my thought was that I totally agree with you about MTSS. It's one of the best research, high effect sizes, and Oregon stands out with the excellence in MTSS. So, and that's in the framework also. But to me, I think that it would be useful to move assessment in a separate area, and then have multi-tiers of instruction, including the good thoughts that they have embedded in here in terms of tier 1, but then also might need additional services, and that could be English language learners. And Julie, you do both at your university, and then children with dyslexia and other learning problems separately, so that it could all be under the services that we provide in terms of core, in terms of tier 2 and tier 3, which would bring in special ed too. So that was my thought about this, but to break out the assessment and put it separately.
Thank you. Dr. Esparza-Brown.
Thanks. I was going to mention and suggest that perhaps you want to look at the work that the 3 model demonstration grants through OSEP had done. And we were one of the grants specifically looking at MTSS for English learners. So I'm going to put the 2 websites to check out into the chat. And I mean, we spent 4 years really researching this and have so much guidance on there that it might be useful in terms of incorporating that. So that's it.
Thank you.
Julie, can I ask a question to you? So I presume that, I mean, English language learners, we have to address in core programs and in tier 2 and in tier 3.
Right.
And that's what it addresses, that not rushing to tier 2 when it could be addressed in tier 1.
Exactly. And that's what is in all of our documents, and our implementation manual is like, if the foundational is really core instruction, right? And so we work through that, and we really look at looking at holistic profiles of English learners and multilingual learners, and how we basically ensure that core first, meets their linguistic and cultural and experiential profiles before moving on. So I'll put those 2 websites. It's throughout. Again, there were 3 cohorts of us doing this work specifically for 3 years.
Thank you.
4 years, actually 5. Okay.
Rep Wright.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we need to differentiate, at least initially, with what administrators need to go through, particularly if we're going to retrain And that I realize that's down the line, but and as we move forward, is there a different way to approach administrators in this process? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Strickland?
Yes, I just wanted to reinforce what Anita said. I really do believe typically when we're putting together standards for the EPPs, we're breaking out assessment. And I think that it's a mistake to include core instruction and assessment together as one program standard. So I would really recommend that that be separated out. And then secondly, with regard to the idea of administrators, we have a separate set of standards for administrators, and I know we haven't addressed that, but we have a set of standards for the principal license, and we have a set of standards for the professional administrator license. And so I'm not sure this is the place to put standards that are going to have to do with administrators with regard to early literacy, but that's a question that remains for me to figure out how you want to do that, how you want to approach that whole issue.
Thank you. Anita, did you have one more comment? You're on mute.
Wayne, if you looked at the ones we did on foundation skills and there were two, how it would relate to administrators, would that be appropriate, or do you want them totally in a different basket?
Yeah, I think it's challenging if you have separate standards for principals and for professional administrators, and yet they need to look to this particular set of standards in order to give them direction. My recommendation is to keep them separate and put a separate set of either a section in the principal standards or a section and also a section in the professional administrator standards or something along that line. I think would be much easier for us to work with EPPs on. Maybe Susan and Rhonda have some thoughts on that as well, since they're at EPPs with regard to what's the wise course of action there.
Could it refer back to the other standards? I mean,
certainly that can happen too. You can refer back to sections of other standards as being incumbent upon them. Certainly.
Susan?
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to comment on that, Wayne, that I think, from an EPP perspective, these are different programs. And while I don't want to say that they shouldn't have one thing to do with another, and we all obviously know some issues with siloing programs to prepare people to go into schools, nevertheless, having them together wouldn't work out from an EPP perspective because they're different groups of faculty, usually working with different curriculum. The accreditors are looking at these programs separately. Obviously, the state is looking at them separately. So I think the referral piece, a link, whatever, it makes sense. But they are definitely distinct.
Well said.
Yeah, Jennifer.
This was just sort of coming back to just Wayne talking about a similar voice. In one of the states, way it's set up with some pieces being along a progression. And so when I think about a new teacher, there's so much here that thinking about is their phrasing that is learning to, is getting ready to, is able to. There was some ways that very more complex skills within this list, or they're being introduced to it, but not yet to a point of proficiency. So I don't know when we begin to write those, to think about which of these skills could be segmented out in that way, so the EPPs could design their programming along a progression and not having this incredible amount of work to be done.
Yeah, I think I remember the one you're talking about, Jennifer, where it had basically they know what it is, and then on the far end it was they could apply it in practice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Massachusetts.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's great, and it's reality, and it certainly does help to continue the idea that they're lifelong learners, and they do become more and more skilled in these areas. I think the way we have typically approached the program standards for the EPPs is when that person gets into the classroom day one, do they have these skills? With a recognition that they're going to continue to grow and develop. And I don't know, I don't know the answer to this, but that was the whole reason why we were talking about, for example, having professional development opportunities or even required professional development so that they grow in those particular areas. I'm not sure how you would clone that Massachusetts document with regard to requirements for EPPs. And so, that's, if you think that's a good way to go, I'm certainly open to that. But we typically have not approached things that way. We typically have asked the EPPs, because they are the ones that have them for that season while they're doing that program. Are those candidates, do they have those skills to be able to step into the classroom effectively? And the EPPs are not typically, at least directly, involved in the continued growth and development of the candidates once they get that license. They typically are going to have to rely upon the school district, the schools, to help provide that continued education and improvement. And so I think those things are great aspirations, but I'm not sure we could do it successfully in terms of the EPP requirements, program standards. I could be wrong. I mean, this is new territory for us as well, so.
Yeah, one thing, since you brought that up about the other state, one thing our group talked quite a bit about was Colorado's, who had their standards on one side, and then on the other side, there was like what that would look like in an educator prep program. And what one of our conversations was, could we agree on some standards and then have professors who teach those classes at EPPs develop what that looks like in practice in the educator prep program.
Yeah, those would certainly be good guides for the EPPs to be able to do that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In the interest of, I don't know who's timekeeping for us on this, but let me know if we need to switch to the next. Dr. Esparza Brown.
Well, I was just I wanted to unpack that a little bit of the EPPs having faculty that developed what were you saying, modules or training opportunities. So I'm not sure how that would fit into workloads. I mean, I'm worried, that as we change standards and have expectations of EPPs, that would need a lot of work in changing programs. I mean, in courses, and I'm not sure that we really want to do that.
That
Well,
certainly is a concern that the EPPs have, the ones that
Yeah.
have been able to glean from this, because
Right.
this is a very, very lengthy set of standards.
Yes.
And, they're concerned about the requirement that might imply with regard to increased credits in the program, increased time of the candidate in the program so that they
Yes.
could not graduate in a reasonable period of time. So again, and the EPPs, I think, are going to be giving more feedback on this in the next month, but that's certainly a concern I have as I look at this. And if you're and union shops are going to be concerned about that as well with regard to the time that it takes to teach this, to implement these kinds of standards.
Yeah, not so much the teaching, but it's really the preparation of, so it does have to be manageable. It's important work, and we have to make sure that everybody, has a specific, the skill set that we want teachers to leave training programs with. But
Yeah.
and where's that balance? So
Yeah.
Dr. Gardner.
Thanks. I'm just going to dovetail on what was said because I probably sound like a broken record to people who've heard me say this before, but coming from the EPP perspective, we're talking about training elementary education teachers. This work is vital and clearly central to everything else they have to teach. But we may be given, if we're lucky, 2 full years of curriculum with these teachers, soon to be teachers. If we're
Yeah.
talking about an MAT program, it might be a year and a half. And in that year and a half to 2 years worth of courses, they have to be prepared to teach science, math, social studies, health, art, physical education, how to assess all of these things, classroom management, differentiated learning, working with all different kinds of learners, thinking about how to work with the different kinds of learners from different backgrounds and languages. And we're talking about social emotional learning, and don't forget like how to work with parents and communities, and then just how to take care of themselves, because that's a lot. So it's a lot. I'm not saying this isn't important. Again, literacy is a part of every single one of those pieces I just mentioned, but it is one piece. So I can be predictive of how EPPs are going to react when they see this long and important list, but it is a long list.
Yeah, I do think there's so much redundancy. We can shrink this up a great deal. But I also want to say, from the perspective of an EPP, it can be done because we have done it. We could meet most of those, if not all of those, things that were put into this document. But I think the reason I wanted to involve other professors in the development of what this needs to look like for EPPs is to give them that voice of how this can work for them in their university. So taking that standard and what does that look like in a preparation program for the level of mastery we expect them to have at the end of initial teacher prep, not for master teachers, of course. Katie, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say too, I mean, as someone who will be directly impacted by these, right, teaching the literacy courses and a former classroom teacher, I mean, for elementary teachers, a big portion of our day is spent on literacy. And when we look at instructional minutes, I think that there are programs where the instructional minutes that candidates have in their preparation doesn't necessarily align with then what's happening in the classroom. And I think it is going to be really hard work. I feel that, knowing some of that is coming towards me at my own institution, but it's so critical. And I think that it might really force us in a good way to kind of rethink teacher preparation, and that it's not this course for a semester, this course for a semester or quarter, but really rethink how we prepare teachers. I think this is a really wonderful opportunity to say, what do they need to have going in? What's required of them once they're in schools? And instead of kind of viewing the list of all of the standards, really thinking and prioritizing different things and giving more time in those spaces. So I know it will be challenging, but I just hope we really view this as a wonderful opportunity to better serve, right, children in Oregon, and to also potentially be really innovative and have some transformation in teacher education that really keeps it in the university, as we see so much of it is leaving it right now. And so I'm excited about what's possible from this work, even though it will be difficult.
Oh, Anita, I was on mute that time.
That's okay. You know, I just wanted to follow up on Katie and the fact that when we look at what makes the most difference in terms of your elementary success, your middle school success, your high school success, your college success, it is literacy. And it should have a much bigger focus than other areas. Not that they're not important, but there's some generalizable concepts that can be utilized in all those areas. But this one we failed on. And I think that really requires university programs to say, well, we need more coursework that is directed to this, because it makes all the difference in the world. I just got a t-shirt that said, literacy and justice for all. And I think that's really, we can never forget the mission, because it is, literacy is justice for all. So thanks, Katie.
I want to redirect, we're group 3, core instruction and assessment. Are there any more specific recommendations for that section that we want them to consider when they go into breakout?
Can I just offer one, hearing this discussion in terms of our hope after this meeting was to get to recommendations that feel ready enough to be able to go to EPPs for public input on Monday and for public input on Monday. That was our hope. But I just want to create like space for if you go into your work groups when we have breakout and you're like, you want more time to clean it up. And I think we have time on the agenda, co-chairs, correct me if I'm wrong, to have a conversation about process, about who cleans them up, who polishes them, all that stuff is for you all to decide. But just to have the pressure off, I just want to offer if there feels like you need some more time, we want to make sure we do have sufficient time for public input, and we had budgeted about a month for that to happen in EPP, Educator Preparation Program input, and we want to continue to honor that, but I just wanted to create some space if that's helpful as you go into your breakouts. So.
Thank you. I think that is helpful, just even given what Wayne said about the need for, definite need for editing, but also need for us to figure out which sections do have redundancies and how we can reconcile those. Might take more time than we can do today. Shanaz?
So I have a specific comment from this section, but the thought goes with the bigger picture of needing to consolidate and shorten. So in the very first disposition in core instruction and assessment, the note I made myself, it says the need for a coherent, high quality use of instructional materials that are aligned with standards. And I just made a note of, and the framework. And that has me thinking about something that I think I mentioned in my work group a couple of times, I can't remember where, but that has come up also with the standards are a body of standards that can't change very frequently, but we want to reflect the fact that knowledge changes and research, there's constantly research being done and the body of knowledge is constantly evolving. And one idea was we can write the standards in a way that they remain in a way that don't need to be updated very often. But if we tie them to the framework can be updated frequently to be kept up with the evolving body of knowledge. And also so much of the things that all the groups articulated so well, I think in our work groups are articulated very well in the framework. So maybe referencing the framework would be a way that we can consolidate the EPP standards if they're feeling overwhelmingly long.
Thank you. Dr. Strickland?
Yes, you make a good point, Shalnez. If I could share my screen for just a second, I'd like to show you how typically we've made sure that kind of thing happens. If I could just show you an example of that. Is it okay to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so is this large enough for people to see? As I've tried to figure out a way to coordinate the TSBC standards with the program standards you're putting into place, one of the things that we've done usually is we've had an introductory section to the set of standards. And so I put together a sample. This may not be totally accurate, but hopefully it gives you the idea. Candidates who are prepared for early literacy and dyslexia, if you decide to break that out, will demonstrate knowledge, skills, professional dispositions, cultural competencies necessary to promote the academic, career, personal, and social development of K-12 students. In learning environments, this recognizes that every student has the right to core literary instruction. And there are several other qualifications that we've put in there. And then in the next section, a requirement for candidates to complete the commission-approved test for early literacy. And I've included with that point F, alignment with the Oregon Early Literacy Framework. And so that's the kind of the way we've typically handled these kinds of things, because we also make reference to the handbook, the TSBC Program Review and Standards Handbook, and say that they need to conform with that. That does help extend the life of the rule. although we've had cases where the rule needs to change because the framework has changed, and we usually try to harmonize with the ODE framework. So that's one of the ways that you could do this by setting apart everything that follows is they have to keep in mind the alignment with the early literacy framework. And if they're preparing people to teach in the classroom, in the K-12 classroom, this makes good sense that they need to make sure that they're aware of that and that whatever they're teaching conforms to that framework. So that's just one way that you could, set it up so that as a foundation, everybody is aware of that.
Thanks for sharing that. I guess my initial reaction and concern with that is what was our concern with the standards, the existing standards, it being too vague and leaving too much room for interpretation, which if they are following the Oregon Literacy Framework, it shouldn't, but I know that was one of our concerns as a council with that approach. I had a couple of things I wanted to add on the assessment section under the skills. I felt like they need to know how to administer multiple types of assessments, and I didn't see anything related to that. And how to interpret assessment data to plan for differentiation. That one, I think it's in there, but it isn't as explicitly stated as I would like to see. But I think those were my big ones for that section.
So if you have a section that deals with assessments, would that be a better place to put it, or do you still want to see it in this section?
I 100% agree with what you said in terms of separating out core instruction and assessment. Those are, to me, two very different things.
Okay.
Dr. Esparza-Brown.
So regarding what you were saying, the assessment piece and particularly interpretation, I mean, that's really where the bias of assessments come in with multilingual learners. It's how people interpret them. So would you see going into a little more detail, particularly for multilingual learners?
I think that would make sense. I feel like we could include in that section, and the understanding that providing assessments in their home languages are priority, I don't even know how to, not priority, but preference maybe.
And that's nuanced. I mean, obviously in dual language programs, that's important. So much more, how do you say it? It is kind of nuanced. So I don't know, we'd want to, again, the work that we've been doing on Project Lay, we have some models of that, show people in dual language programs, how to look holistically across languages and just I don't know, how do we reference other sources to help people understand, when it's appropriate? Because sometimes I hear, teachers even have these blanket, oh, we need to assess in the native language. I need a test for it. Well, have they ever had formal instruction in the native language?
Right.
So or maybe a series of questions. I don't know, but I think it's a point that we need to really consider.
Yeah, I agree.
We may be able to come up with a definition of assessment literacy that incorporates an understanding of the bias that could be inputted in a variety of assessments. So I haven't seen it. I can't remember if there was one. I don't think there was one in the framework, but it's just an overall definition. I'll jot that down for our group.
Yeah, because again, the bias really comes in the interpretation if we don't look at the context of the student.
Right.
Maybe just because I've been out of education for over 20 years and obviously college too, but I'm, as a student who wants to become a teacher, I'm struggling with a concept, maybe you could help me, that I'm a monolingual teacher and I'm trying to teach dual language students. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how we do that effectively. I guess that's my question.
Dr. Esparza Brown, do you want to address that?
Well, yeah, okay, so you don't, if you're not teaching in a dual language program, you're not teaching that a home language like in Spanish or Russian, whatever. Monolingual teachers can still be really effective teachers of multilingual students, following certain principles and understanding how to interpret data, understanding what their language proficiency levels are, and what that means to instruction and to assessment. What kind of formal educational background that they've had. So it's just a variety of factors that they consider that provides the context for students so that they then know how to adapt instruction according to the students' needs and scaffolds that they might need across language. So it's an important question, but it is important also to let people know that you don't necessarily need to be bilingual to do a good job of teaching multilingual students if you're teaching in English.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks. Ken, did you have something you could share with us?
Yeah, I just wanted to provide some context, pivoting back to the kind of assessment and core instruction, just some context around the choice and the framework of why they were combined in the section. Of course, no right or wrong answer here. Just wanted to provide the council with kind of that rationale. We made that choice to emphasize that when really effective assessment, particularly formative assessment, is thought of as a part of instruction, not separate from. And again, just like that's kind of a stylistic or communication choice. And again, council can go in whatever direction you so choose, but thought that was an important piece of context in terms of why they were combined in the framework as opposed to separated. So I just wanted to provide that for the group.
Thank you. That is helpful.
That is helpful, Ken. And I think that the other piece that I would say is we put that in about the formative assessment. And a part of that I would see in practices as well is that progress monitoring should be happening weekly to inform your next week's like small group targeted instruction. But a lot of times it's not. And so that piece of the framework that really calls out formative instruction, it's almost 2 pages in it, is really important. That I felt like coming back to make sure that there's lots of different assessments, but the formative is the one that the classroom teacher needs to be always doing ongoing. But what we often see is that formative assessments turn summative and they're just done, report card time or every 8 weeks, and it needs to be every week.
Yeah, and I think that aligns with the idea of incorporating explicitly multi-tiered systems of support, so that they understand the differences in the assessments and when you use which types of assessments and for what purpose. So I think that could really shore up that assessment section. I guess I'm not, I understand why the framework was built that way, but I still think I would err on the side of separating the two out when it comes to the standards. Of course, talking about assessment in terms of how it drives instructional decisions, but as far as core instruction, keeping them separate makes more sense to me. But we are way over time. We've only gotten through one section of this. So if there are additional things that you want that group to consider, would you please put those in the chat so that they have that as they move on into what we have left for a small group breakouts. Susan, are you feeling like we're okay to just keep plunging through and shorten up the breakouts, or what are you thinking?
And, I wonder what maybe the temperature of the group is, because we wanted the space to do exactly what we're doing, right? To give feedback on each of these and have a larger group discussion. At the same time, we also have already heard some feedback about length and, other details that certainly are applicable across all three groups. So I don't know. I mean, I'm interested in knowing, this is the time on the agenda where we had planned to move into small groups. Obviously, we haven't gone to group 1 and 2. So if this is more helpful to have this larger group conversation that everyone can feel they can contribute to, that's great. We can keep doing that. If we feel like this could be a moment where we maybe want to go into small groups and see if there's shared concerns or issues, we could come back. I mean, I'm just interested in what you think as a group about what makes sense as next steps and how to best use the time we have.
Rep. Right.
I would be in favor of a shortened small group session after each one of these that we talk about. Could be just 10 minutes, but that gives us a chance to talk as a group and then come back to the whole, just a suggestion.
So you're thinking, we would right now go into a session to talk about that work, the section 3, and then come back? What would our deliverable be in coming back if we're going into our own group sessions?
Well, I think that this is a knowledgeable group who is willing to share ideas. I just think sometimes in smaller groups, we share better what we're thinking about instead of the whole group together. So again, just a thought.
Thank you. Julie, you said you would kind of rather go through each of the parts and then go into small groups for small group discussion. Okay. So that's kind of our two choices, I think. So if you would prefer to go into small group now, discuss group 3's work, and then come back, show thumbs up right now if that's what you want. Or if you would rather go through the other 2 sections and then go to a small group with what time we have left. Thumbs up for that. Okay. Okay, it looks like we'll go through the other sections. Susan, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, maybe we want to do a time check at 20 minutes,
Okay.
and just see how much more, because that one took us 45.
Yeah.
So just so, we have only about an hour and 10 minutes left. So we just want to.
Okay, yeah. If someone will keep track of the 20 minutes for me, that would be great.
Yes, we will do that. And I think I will just ask the staff who staffed each of the work groups to kind of just keep track of the notes of some of the more meaty issues that are coming up in this conversation. Then perhaps those can be things that we think about process-wise about digging into, perhaps in work groups between meetings. So we don't necessarily need to solve for all of the things in this meeting, but it is really good to get kind of a landscape and gut check from all of you in this really rich discussion. So.
Thank you. Well, I think we'll shift into group 2. So this group was the group I was in. We focused on foundational skills and also writing, reading comprehension, vocabulary, and background knowledge. So it was a big topics. So it was myself, Rep. Wright, Dr. Archer, Julie Reagan, Dr. Danielson, and Dr. Overstreet, and Senator Weber. Is there anyone from our group that would like to say something? I do have a little bit prepared to kind of introduce our thinking. And so if there's something you want to add after I have done that, you feel free to add to what I have to say. So when we were approaching this, we kind of looked at all different angles. Could we do a state? Should we look at the IDA, International Dyslexia Association Knowledge and Practice Standards for our framework? And we really landed on using those. And the reason we thought that was a logical step was that that it's already in legislation in statute, that in the dyslexia legislation, that the knowledge and practice standards are used as a framework in that. So it felt like that was a really easy way to put the standards together and make sure that all children were getting that high quality instruction as is stated in that standard, or in that legislation, sorry. So since it was already in rule, it seemed like that made a lot of sense for us to go there. And it aligned quite well with the Oregon Literacy Framework. There were a couple of areas that we thought we needed to add a few things that were not present in the knowledge and practice standards, but we thought were important. So we did borrow a little bit from Ohio, and I don't think we ended up borrowing from Colorado. I think it was just Ohio that we borrowed from. So with that, does anyone else in our group have any comments about our process?
When we look at the framework, most of the framework focuses on the foundation skills. And so even in the directive that we were given, it said address phonemic awareness, phonics, letter sound associations, all of those foundation skills. But since it's already the law, and it's not just the law for dyslexia, because in the law it states these should be taught, the same standards should be utilized for all students in learning literacy skills, whether it's English language learners or students with dyslexia or learning challenges, or basically, if you're going to teach reading, sort of like you're going to teach someone how to ride a bike, you're going to teach the same skills no matter their age, who they are, what they need to know to ride a bike. So to me, this one is sort of the heart of what was requested by the governor.
Thank you. One other comment I wanted to make on our disposition section, we decided it kind of was overarching across all of our sections. So we just made one section on dispositions. So what questions do you have about those standards and things that we need to revise and address? Rep. Wright?
Just a quick note. Writing specifically, it's wonderful that we make sure we have clear and concise writing, but if you can't read it, then it doesn't help. So I think we need to add something concerning handwriting. And that's a specific skill, motor skill, but I think it's important to note.
Yeah, thank you for that. And after receiving that from you this morning, I really thought a lot about the research that is out there that discusses automaticity in handwriting. And that's something that we got away from for a while as teachers. And I think it is something that needs to be explicit in the standards. Thank you for finding that. Shanaz.
I agree. I feel like we've been focusing on that this year with a lot of intentionality to be able to have the fluency there with the practice of it. The letters program calls it out as well. I don't have any specific feedback other than just say this is like the steps, the way that you've articulated, the mapping of it is really clear. And I think that it spells it out, especially like the decoding and word recognition and the fluency, the way you've broken it apart. It just is really, really clear when I was looking it over.
Thank you. Shanaz.
Actually, Julie, why don't you go ahead? I've already spoken a few times. I'll go after you.
Thanks. I just wanted to say I agree with Rep. Wright about the addition of handwriting. And I was just going to suggest maybe it would be appropriate to put it in the fluency section. I'm not quite sure. But handwriting fluency is what I'm thinking of.
Is it possible to add it to number 14 that we already have? Research-based principles for teaching letter formation, both manuscript and cursive, and developing automaticity in handwriting. Because the
Yeah.
research is basically all done by the same people, the two together.
Oh, yeah,
That makes sense.
yeah.
Susan.
I don't know this research, and I'm definitely not an expert, so I'm deferring to those of you who are. How is handwriting ability handled in terms of students who might have lower motor abilities? I mean, so if we're talking about reaching all learners, how is this really gonna apply when we know that some of those learners actually do better with keyboarding, for example, than handwriting? So I'm just wondering, what I just don't want to see is we tie our hands and then create inadvertent issues.
So
Rep Wright.
You have a valid point. It almost should be handwriting and keyboarding. And I know both of those have kind of gone by the wayside, but writing for those who can be clear and concise on what they do and be taught how specifically they do that. It's a tactile thing. I mean, we think about the ways in which kids learn, and one of is touch, feeling, and making sure they understand what a C looks like by actually doing it. But it also relates that to keyboarding. So they can be one and the same. We want to differentiate between them. I don't have a problem with that at all.
I think we need to make sure we are rooting everything in the research. So we need to really look at what the research says about handwriting and versus keyboarding or otherwise. And handwriting, to your point, Susan, for students with disabilities or those who have difficulty with fine motor skills. So I think we want to make sure we're grounding this all in what exists in the research. And I haven't looked at handwriting research specifically for quite some time. So Anita, do you have something you could add to that?
well, the research, particularly Steve Graham is the best research team
Right.
on handwriting. And so they did find that automaticity, both of handwriting, was critical in terms of the quality of what the students wrote, so that they could have their thoughts not on how to form the letter, but what their thought was to be on paper. The only other series of studies would look at really young children, and the studies that were done where they were learning letters and they would respond with a computer-based response versus a writing response, and there was significant difference in their attainment of letter sound association as they learned the graphemes. So, and it's sort of these standards we would, throughout all of them, if the students were doing poorly in phonemic awareness, then we would use a MTSS model, finding what scaffolding we'd use. If they did poorly in handwriting, what kind of scaffolding we could add. It's sort of by, I mean, I don't know if we want to have it in every single standard, but rather in terms of MTSS, what kind of scaffolding would be added in tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
But it is an area that's had very unique, for example, handwriting in the studies they did, fairly large studies in 5th and 6th grade, was able to predict the quality of the passages that they wrote in 7th and 8th grade. So that if you weren't automatic in it, and it was true also of typing.
Julie Esparza Brown.
Just an anecdote, I have a niece and nephew that are 16 and 20, and neither of them can read handwriting. So I can't write them letters. I can't write them notes in cursive. It has to be printed. So, I mean, you bring up a really valid point, Rep. Wright, that it is critical that we start teaching it. When I was teaching kindergarten years ago, we actually taught Danielian. It was an approach to print went into cursive, and I don't know what happened with that, but virtually every child, I had kids with disabilities, was able to really develop their printing and later into cursive that I noted from that kind of, I don't know what happened to it, but I think it is important that we address it in the standards.
So if you notice 13, know and apply and practice the major domains that contribute to written expression, including transcription, and that would be handwriting, keyboarding, punctuation. And then translation skills would be taking your thoughts from your plan into what you're writing. So those are sort of broad terms to cover what we know about those two areas.
Can you clarify translation there as you're thinking about the language used so that people don't get that confused with language translation?
No, yes. Can I send you some really good visuals that sort of get at this? But so
I think just put it some language that would clarify that.
okay, so let me just move on and I'll just find you something that will say it all.
Well, I think that's something that group 2 could talk about in our small group too, as what language.
And I would love to talk to Julie about that. Okay, Julie, yes. So
We have less than 9 minutes. at this
Okay, thank you. All right. So any other specific suggestions? We'll pivot from handwriting. We know that's a place we want to add something. Shanaz, what other suggestions do you have for that section?
Huge kudos on the foundational skills section. In our group, when we were working on reading models, we often kept wanting to get into details, and we kept saying, actually, hopefully this is in foundational skills, and it all is. So yay, foundational skills. I made the same note though in 2 different places, not though, in addition. So under phonological awareness, it says number 4, but number 1 under phonological awareness, where it says, correctly identify, classify, and compare all the consonant phonemes and all the vowel phonemes of English. So I would really like this wording to be changed to the language of instruction. We have several dual language programs in the state in different languages. And I feel like if this says English, it creates a loophole for somebody teaching in a language other than English to think, oh, well, I don't need to teach phonemic awareness in this language because I don't teach in English. So I'd like it to say the language of instruction or something like that, just something to not specify that this only happens in the classrooms where English is the language of instruction. And then same exact idea in the first one under decoding and word recognition, where it talks about English orthography. I'd like it to say something more like the orthography of the language of instruction.
I wholeheartedly agree. Great point. Great catches. Yeah.
And there is some pretty interesting research on handwriting from Spain that Dr. Elsa Cardenas Hagen uses a lot in her teachings and her programs that might be beneficial as we're looking at that part.
Thank you.
By the way, just to add, Elsa Cardenas Hagen was part of our cohort for the model, the MTSS work that we did for ELs. So you'll find her work within our websites too.
Thank you. All right. We need to do a check-in then. Are we ready to go into small group, or do we need to go through group 1, or what are our choices here? Susan, I'd love your thoughts.
Well, I thought we were going to get through the next group.
Okay.
So I guess maybe it's a check-in on how we're feeling about moving on to group 1, or if there's anything more on group 2. I think we probably still have a couple more minutes.
And Julie, you put, you like the language. Are you referring to that section?
What uh,
Oh.
10 wrote there, translation, transcription
Oh, okay,
are discussed and defined within the context of writing. Yeah, that's all I'm just
okay. Thank
clarifying.
you.
Do you want to do the next group in just this setting for 10 more minutes, then take a 5-minute break and then go back into breakouts? Would that feel good
Sure.
to
Yeah,
folks?
I think that
Okay.
makes sense.
Let's do
Thank
10
you.
more minutes. So we'll pivot at 2:17 to the break, and then we'll have a 5-minute break.
Sounds good. All right, group one focused on reading models and oral language. This included co-chair Gardner, Julia Sparsa Brown, Rep Bowman, Shanaz Sanao, is it Sano? Sorry.
It's a lot of the same letters. Shauna Sano.
Oh, thank you. Valerie Switzler, and Charlene Williams. Anyone from that group that wants to share any context before we open it up for questions?
I'm gonna elect Shauna's because you did such a great job of summarizing before.
Yep.
Okay, we had a really rich conversation and really took advantage of the opportunity to articulate and elaborate a little bit more on the oral language, because it feels like something that has been lacking clarity and importance historically. So we elaborated on that a lot and came to what felt like some pretty good consensus. Valerie had some really important perspective there for Native and Indigenous culture also. So that's something we're still not sure that we've landed precisely where we need to be with that. So that's something we want to make sure to get feedback on. And then reading models based in research, we spent a lot of effort trying to be comprehensive, but not super redundant. So we already tried to consolidate a bit, but hoping that we could consolidate even more. And like I just mentioned, we really tried to leave the nuts and bolts of the particular foundational skills to a different section. And it's great that we see them all there. Group members, did I leave anything out?
No.
I'll open it up for questions or comments on those two sections. Shanaz, if you have more to say, you can.
I forgot, I should mention we had a big discussion about Bloom's level of taxonomy and choosing particular like specific verbs for the different areas, dispositions, knowledge, and skills. And one way that we could consolidate that we didn't like some other groups did was put understand and apply. We could consolidate in that way if that would be helpful.
Thank you. Jennifer, what questions do you have?
The only thing I'm thinking of, and just because we're trying to apply it here right now, is in number 3 on the knowledge and skills for oral language, that so much of reading and writing is predicted on the oral language, but that I wouldn't say we're great at screening it. And so that's, I think, the work that we're trying right now is that trying that screening in our pre-K to intervene early and finding those. So I know it kind of comes up in assessment, but I don't know that it is predicated and that assessing it early to intervene can mitigate maybe some of the issues that come later. It's hard to find a quality screener. I think that some of the states have been working on it. We're going to try to pilot one in our pre-K and kindergarten in January to see what that looks like, because we have not been able to find the oral language piece that then we can begin to really help and support. So I don't know if that goes there or an assessment, but it really is crucial.
Yeah, I feel like that makes sense to me in assessment. That understanding of that critical piece. Anita.
When I read the research on oral language, sometimes we overlook the fact that the term academic vocabulary or language we often refer to like in science or social studies, but actually the biggest differences in students entering school is the lack of academic knowledge, like knowing what a square is, knowing what same is, and so but the research, even though we know its critical nature, the research is a little bit weak in this area in terms of people addressing it again and again and again. But I have put out to a few of my friends who are in oral language to see if we could get a better idea of what's the body of research on it, not just multi-language, but for students coming in without having a foundation from their own home experience of conversational English and academic language.
Thank you. What other comments or questions do you have about the oral language or the reading models section? Katie.
Yeah, I had just wondered, and Shanaz, you brought this up a little bit, but if under the oral language under skills, if that educators are able to teach the range of phonemic awareness, that seems a little bit repetitive to the foundational skills in section 2, and if we need to have that here, now that you've kind of seen what we've done in section 2, if that's something we could strike.
Yeah.
That's a great suggestion. We'll take a look at that in our small group.
So I wonder if maybe we need to talk about kind of the sequencing of oral language development, going back to thinking about what you were saying, Anita. It's like that's what educators need to know. It's like, how does oral language develop in any language?
That's exactly what I was thinking, Julie.
Yeah, okay.
The whole idea of
Yep.
Yeah.
the understanding the sequence of it, understanding the kind of academic language differences in school from what is conversational English or Spanish or Russian. Yeah. The ones that really interfere, because I see it as I visit schools, like, oh yeah, it's amazing the difference by community, by parents, by of the academic language they bring to the school site.
Right. Okay, so we'll think about some of that language to add.
Right. And, it seemed I just need to go back and look at other states again to see what they did about language. I know it's important, but it just doesn't get the same focus as the one in the foundation skills we were pretty clear on. That part is in everything, right? Dyslexia, English language learners, and in the law already. So that one was one that people will have pretty good agreement with. But this one, we need to do some investigation on.
Okay, so time check again. We have about 2 minutes. Anything else on this one before we move into our break?
Did we do models?
We were kind of opening it up for both, but I did have a couple of things under the reading models section that I wanted to just highlight and bring up. There has been some debate about the active view of reading and the fact that it's a new theory and therefore it doesn't have a lot of evidence to support it yet. So I was wondering if that one and even the 4-part processing model could be somehow addressed as theory rather than the other two really have a very strong evidence base already. So I don't know how we could differentiate between the two, because they are all listed in the framework, but just so that it's clear which ones do have the evidence and which do not. That was kind of my biggest thing about that section, I think.
Theory versus research. Yep,
Yeah.
I made that same note. Seems that the main thing is that we want to take the models and be certain that the big ideas are taught to teachers to utilize. And I'm not certain that this section, besides being mentioned in others, like be certain that the teachers and the foundations up in the dispositions or in the knowledge, that they're aware of the major frameworks that cover these areas, and that they will be ever updated and so forth. I don't know if we need a separate section on them. That was because one led to the other.
I know we're almost out of time, but one thing I think we might want to think about, and Shanaz, you already kind of brought this up, that you noticed that some of the things that you included were addressed in other sections. So after break, when we go back into breakout groups, that might be something for the groups to talk about. You know, are there things that you wrote in your section that were covered somewhere else? So we can start to eliminate some of that redundancy. With that, Susan, we probably should break.
Thanks, Rhonda. So yes, our plan is to take a 5-minute break. I have way too many windows open on my computer. So we're going to come back, how about at 12:23, and we will then go into our breakout rooms. So when we come back, that's where we'll start, and we will be there for about, 20, 30 minutes-ish. We'll check in.
Thanks.
All right, as we are getting back, we, as I mentioned, are going to be moving shortly into our breakout rooms, our groups that we had previously. And the purpose of that time, as you are in those groups, and we'll go till about 2:50, is to prioritize, refine what you heard as feedback from this larger group discussion we had. Just to kind of break it down. And when we say prioritize, what it means is that, we obviously had a lot of input on a lot of different things in this bigger discussion. So what you're really thinking about is how to prioritize the work that comes next. Thinking about digging into feedback, what needs to come first, maybe what's going to take more time, less time. So really thinking about how to prioritize next steps related to the feedback that you received. So before we go into those breakout rooms, and Alex will open them, any questions about what we're going to be doing in the next half hour-ish? Okay. So with that, we will see you back at about 2:50. All right, Rhonda, are we gonna have the groups report out now?
I think that's what's next on the agenda. Feel free to go ahead and lead that.
Oh, okay.
If
So we just, if you didn't know, we're all kind of in the background trying to get everything like, let's maneuver this and let's change that. So we appreciate your patience as we're all trying to do this with many windows open on our computer. So we wanted to have groups have a chance to report back, and we're going to take only about 20 minutes to do that. So just to provide an opportunity to share any refinements you made to your recommendation. So if we want to take some time to do that, let's start. Why don't we just be crazy and start with group 2?
Okay, so we talked about the language of in our section, we said teachers and administrators need to. We talked about making that consistent across the document and using educators, but then putting teachers and administrators in parentheses so that it makes it clear that this is expected knowledge for everybody. We talked about moving oral language to this section. And then following with the assessment and the special populations. We talked about the language of instruction that Shana's called out on number 5 under phonological awareness. And we talked about that staying as English because we talked about the idea of like Tracy Whedon and the language you're loved in versus the language of the schoolhouse. And that if you're going to get more specific with other languages, maybe that's like for an ELL program endorsement. We thought that it was more appropriate to stick with English. We thought that it would be best if we could work with one set of dispositions for the entire document. We would like to suggest that the document follow the format of the know and apply or understand and apply that was used in this section. And we talked about under writing, the handwriting, we made an edit. So instead of saying principles for teaching letter formation, would say for building automaticity in handwriting and keyboard as developmentally appropriate. And Rhonda, do you have anything you would like to add?
No, I don't think so. I know that, well, I guess I do, sorry. I know that when we went through the knowledge and practice standards, there was something that mentioned training new teachers how to find information regarding phonemes in other languages that are being used in the classroom or for instruction, or I can't remember exactly how it was worded. So that might be something we would want to highlight, but I know Dr. Esparza Brown, would you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I really disagree with having it just be English, because there really, in the ESL standards, I mean, this is going to be about teaching every child to read in Oregon, right? And so we have to consider even monolingual teachers that are trying to teach a multilingual learner literacy in English. You still have to know something about their native sounds. And so what's going to be common across English, that's an instructional approach that you'll learn. And I also, there's not a separate license right now for a dual language license versus just the general teacher license. So again, if we're thinking about inclusivity and all the students that we have in front of us, I think it's really important for that to be in the language of instruction. Yes, mostly the default's going to be English.
Well, I guess my concern with that is how many languages in a teacher prep program, how many different languages and how many different phonemes within each of those languages are we going to be exposing our initial teacher prep, or how does that work?
It's just they're exposed to the reason why it's important to know that for the students that they're teaching, because then like in assessment, for example, if you see some errors that are common across kids that are native Spanish speakers, then you understand, oh, I need to dig deeper. Let me find out about the phonology of Spanish and how that's impacting these kids. But it's really more of a process and a framework and a thinking process. No, they're not going to know all of them, right? And then showing them the resources of here's places where you can find out more about kids' native languages, because it's going to impact your instruction in English.
Yeah, so we want them to have all of the phonemes of English, plus be able to support other languages of instruction within the classroom. Is that?
But also this is a license that applies to dual language teachers. So if we're only saying that they have to know the sounds in English, that is not addressing the needs of all students.
So what if we added and the phonemes of the languages of instruction within dual language programs or something like that. Shanaz, go ahead.
I'm
Yeah, so
just wondering for process, I'm sorry, Shanaz, I just wonder for process purposes, because again, we have a shortened amount of time here. Part of the next part of the agenda is around what are our parking lot issues? So what are things we are not going to resolve today? And I'm leaning that might be this. So, you know, it's this for us, something we want to make sure we take up at our future meetings. So I guess that's part of how I want to address how we use our time. We still have other groups to talk with, etc.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anita, did you have a comment?
Well, I would like us to, in the future, to talk about how the oral language could be, because it's a foundation skill, included there. And that we would also be able to move some of the oral language discussion to English language learners. And remember this, we wrote ours to follow the IDA, which was already in place, and they did have one that new teachers would know how to access the languages that they're going to directly serve in terms of phonemes and vocabulary and cognates and so forth. And I think that because we have no idea in the future of what will be the major languages, though probably Spanish will be, but making it so that they are aware that they need to do that. But I don't think that they have to learn it as an undergraduate or graduate student. I think they need to be aware of doing it. And also to how we might incorporate the models, because they basically have redundant information since the standards foundations were based on the framework. Those are my areas of meeting again on.
So we have 10 more minutes. How do we want to move on from this group? We still have 2 more groups to hear from. Is there anything else we need to talk about at this point with group 2? Just checking in.
I think we can move on. And I agree with the parking lot idea on that language.
And I will keep track of all the parking lot issues that seem to create lots of conversation. All right, so now let's go to group 3. Changes, prioritization, conversations there.
I'll start out and then anyone can add in. We had, we incorporated feedback on the multi-tiered support system. We did some adding and some combining of things and clarifying. We spent some time talking about the conversation about separating them. And I think that our group is really leaning towards keeping them together, because so oftentimes we see when assessment is separated, then it becomes a separate part. And the assessment piece is really to be integrated with core instruction to inform those next moves. So I think our group was really leaning forward, not separating them out and keeping them together like they are in the framework. And so you can see in our document that's linked in the chat, the different pieces that we changed. Does anybody else from group 3 want to chime in? We also talked about standardizing some of the language to make it flow a little bit better, and that making sure that section 8 has the different groups represented.
Questions, thoughts, concerns about any of that from group 3?
I'm just wondering, I understand what you're saying about instruction and assessment, keeping them together so that they are not siloed. But it's not just core instruction, so should it just be generically instruction and assessment rather than core, because assessment is critical for intervention and other supports. So if we keep it together, can we not keep it just core instruction, I guess is my question. I'm wondering.
Yeah, we have in there, that, understanding diagnostic and screeners and understanding when to administer and how to administer different types of instruction, different types of assessment. So it isn't just the teacher using the assessment, but that there are outer systems that may come in to administer assessments, or that the assessments are used to identify students needing more support.
That help, Rhonda? Your
Yeah,
concern?
probably number 5, Rhonda, if you wanted to look at number 5, maybe to make sure. I can see that idea. I don't know if that needs to be clarified more, though.
And you put it in the chat? No. It's in the file.
Yeah, I can relink it, though. It's at the top under group 3.
Okay.
Any other concerns, questions, issues with the changes that group 3 recommends? Okay. Ready to move on to our final group, group 1? Jana's, Julie, Charlie. Anybody want to jump in?
Sure. We struck that what had been our first skill in oral language, based on the feedback that's very well articulated in foundational skills. So we took that out. We discussed our group feels that it's important to keep that knowledge number 3 about a child's ability to read and write being predicated on oral language, whether or not that is incorporated in assessment also. Regardless of that, we think that this is it belongs here as an important understanding for educators. Based on Anita's feedback, we added one under knowledge about educators understanding the actually we added 2, didn't we? We added educators understanding the developmental sequence of language in all cultures, not in all cultures, that apply to all spoken language. Sorry, common to all language.
Can you read that? And just to, educators understand the developmental sequence of oral language common to all languages. So just to hear clear.
Thank you, Julie. And since you have it right there, would you read the one we added for number 2 also? Thank you.
And then related to the social and academic language, educators understand the difference between social and academic language and the context in which each is appropriate. So, Dr. Archer, those kind of consistent with your comments earlier?
Okay, and then in reading models, we took number 2 under knowledge, which had been pretty long, and based on the feedback about, well, 3 of those are considered more stronger research-based and 2 theory. We changed, we reworked all of that entire one. We took out the listing of the specific models and theories and reworded it. Julie, do you still have it open right in front of you?
I do. Okay, it says now, educators understand that the reading models found in the Oregon Early Literacy Framework reflect the ever-evolving research findings and hold important insight into how children acquire literacy skills that are paramount for shaping and reshaping how literacy instruction is approached and designed. So again, we took out those models and just tried to refer back to the framework and that ever-evolving piece that research changes.
And then corollary to that was the corresponding skill that we had. We consolidated the wording and took out the list, and again, just referenced the models in the framework.
So the wording now is educators implement multiple models of reading from the Oregon Early Literacy Framework into instruction.
Thank you. So any questions, concerns, or issues with any of those changes?
The last thing we did include right, in relation to, Rep. Bomer's comment earlier. Where was that? Added. It's in red somewhere. Okay, it's under knowledge, under oral language, under knowledge, it is now number 6. We said educators understand that learning to read, and then we included and write involves learning about print, blah, blah, blah. So,
Thank you. Any concerns, questions, issues? Okay. All right. So where we are on the agenda, Rhonda, feel free to jump in as well, is we had planned to pivot here to talking a little bit about decision-making around what we have using our FISTA 5 model. And we were going to do some polls and just kind of see, again, get a temperature of how we're feeling about the sections. Do we feel ready for that? I see some.
The challenge here is that it's not just the content, it is the way that they are structured consistently, not redundant. So many of those things go into it. It's hard to say yes or no on the sections because we still haven't taken care of the overall kinds of challenges.
Yeah, I agree with that point. I think it's important. And, I know one of the suggestions that had been brought up earlier was the idea of having someone or some ones going through and maybe doing a larger edit, trying to reduce redundancy, make connections. So that could be a part of the conversation right now, is just thinking about how should that happen? Who should be involved in doing that? Guidelines, thoughts, concerns about doing that. So taking all these pieces and making them whole.
well, I agree that I think it's going to be difficult to, without having somebody consolidate them and be streamlined to really understand the whole picture. It still feels a little bit disconnected to me. So it's hard to move on to the next process.
Yeah, it does to me too, and I would love to hear some TSBC input on this, but it feels like I mean subcategories are fine, but shouldn't we have one set of recommendations for these standards rather than it feels like now we have 5 or 6. So, how can we compile that into one? But Wayne, I'd love to hear your take on that too.
Yeah, it seems to me there's a lot of work left to do. And you want to do it right and you want to do it well. And I don't know whether this is even within the realm of possibility, but hiring a professional editor to work through this, to do the work that needs to be done, or if there's somebody, on the agency staff that is a professional editor that could do that work, is going to make it a lot easier, it seems to me, to give a consensus with regard to these particular standards. So we do not have anybody at TSBC that's equipped to do that. I think whoever does it's going to have to work closely with somebody who understands the terminology. There's some very specialized terminology being used in this set of standards. So sometimes when you try to consolidate, you try to make it less wordy, you can do damage to the concept. So I know that takes more time, but it also, I think, is important if we're going to have a credible, well-designed set of standards. Anita has her hand up, by the way.
Anita?
My very deformed hand, I'm sorry. So almost all the people that I've connected with in this process had someone, but they had to have content expertise.
Right.
And so that's really difficult. Stephanie Stoller, who some of us know, did this for a number of states. And I don't know, I mean, we couldn't get someone at a higher level who's both done editing and the content. But I'd love to have the consistency of the language so that when people read it, they think it's so professional and it's done right and it's going to make a difference. And all the groups in our state, when it comes out, says, oh my God, I can't believe how good this is. That would be good, wouldn't it, Wayne?
Oh, yes, definitely. And especially if we want to have a set of standards that the governor is going to be happy with. I think that's very, very important.
Yeah.
Well, the more polished they are and look great, then it's going to be the stakeholders, our EPPs are going to see the logic in them,
Right.
Julie?
I don't want to give anybody more work, but I am just wondering out loud if it would make sense for a group of you who are on this council and also represent EPPs, if you worked on it together to fine tune it, and go through those things, because people in the EPPs are going to be most impacted. And so I think you guys are probably looking at it with a little bit of a different lens. I don't know.
I think prior to that, it's really goes back to that consolidation and streamlining it so we have a more clear picture of what we have in front of us. So I think that there's still some steps in between.
Yeah, that was exactly my thought about that, was if we had someone that's doing that streamlining and editing, and then it goes to those of us in the EPPs for review, that would make a lot of sense to make sure we haven't lost the essence.
Yes.
Do we have a budget?
Pooja? That might be a question for you.
I think we can marshal resources kind of necessary to do the work. I'll answer it that way. Yeah, I mean, we have agency staff, and we can see if there's a way to get someone on board that kind of has the expertise that you all are naming.
Yeah, and I wonder, if the team could put together what they think, and then those of us from the EPPs or our early literacy experts in particular, to make sure we haven't lost the content. Jennifer, I see your hand raised.
I just can, if we talk about streamlining, I'm worried it's just there's a lot in there because we were working in small groups. And the way one state had it organized was just like it was minimal. And then there's a link, and then the link is what pulls out the more articulation of what the standard means. So because everything's important and it feels very urgent right now, but I don't want a lot to just get lost in, like we've put everything in. But I did appreciate, like when I went through Massachusetts, it was like reading it, and then I would click on a link and it's like, oh, okay, now I understand what that means. And so having a place to articulate it, this is what it means, that might help us to let go of some things.
I also want to make sure that we do have some TSPC guidance in this sooner than later, only because there is a particular format that we want to ensure is maintained, instead of having to later on have to rework it and then everything is, is lost that we feel as a council is vital. There's a lot that goes into monitoring these standards, assessing these standards, documenting these standards, and then it has to relate to national accreditation standards. There's a lot in each one of these things in every content area for each license. Oh.
Well, to a certain extent, you're right, Susan. But it's also indicative of what we haven't been doing. Obviously, what we have been doing hasn't been working. We can see our graduation rates. We can get information and data on how many kids get out of high school and or drop out because they can't read. So obviously, what we have been doing hasn't been what we wanted to happen. So I think we're going to have to look at this and decide what our priorities are. And if this is it, if we come out with what's important, then we have to make sure that it's followed. And I know that we have great people in the TSPC that will help us do that. So I think we're on a new trajectory, and we just need to go full bore ahead once we get it right.
Right. Getting it right.
And I'm not disputing that. I think what I want to do is not get the cart in front of the horse. And then later, when the actual TSPC has to go through, the commission has to go through it and say, this isn't in the format we need, go back again, and the council is done. I just want to make sure we're, I guess, walking hand in hand instead of disjointed. That's my point. Anita?
I see the danger in going to lack of specificity. If there's specific things that make a difference in children gaining reading, it should be in here. And we should not have any of those very general statements that open the door to any theory, any way you want it. We've done that in the past. Use good practice. Well, what is good practice? I think that we have to be very certain that if we can envision a person having these skills, that they'll be able to teach reading. And that they'll be conscious of English language learners, children with dyslexia, and children with other learning challenges.
And I can't remember now who has said it, but that idea of, and we've talked about this from the get-go, looking at the way other states have formatted standards that are states that also follow accreditation nationally. Could that be a guidepost for us in terms of formatting? So that we stay within what TSPC needs, but also expand that and provide the specificity that we know we need to add. We've talked about that from the beginning also, so. Something else to consider as we're recompiling.
Anita. You're muted.
Examples, maybe we could look at which one we like better as a structure, and then we can at least go with that structure.
Yeah, because right now, I mean, the structure isn't even consistent across the groups, right? Some say understand and apply. Our section didn't do that. So, I mean, we really need somebody just to streamline it and make it consistent.
Because we, Julie, because
Uh-oh, you just
Anita, you're muted again.
everybody, if we had picked a model first and then everybody would fit
yeah,
that,
okay.
would have
Yeah.
had that leap, but we didn't do that. So, but I think that would make a difference.
So can we make a plan on how to get this done? And then we can come back and look at it with clear, it'll be easier to see what content is there and if there's any gaps and redundancies. I almost feel like I can't move forward without having
having it closer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Julie.
And I guess piggybacking on what Susan said earlier, I guess specifically Wayne, is there something specific that you would need from the formatting style?
Well, I've alluded to a few things. The standards in Oregon are not overly detailed. And that's been the problem, I guess, that has crept up with regard to this particular standard. I still think there needs to be a balance. I like the idea of some kind of a commentary that might give guidance to the EPPs, but that would not be in rule. And I think right now, the standards as they are suffer from minute detail in some cases, but not in other cases. And so I don't know, because I'm not an expert in this field, I don't know how you find that balance to make sure the critical concepts are there, but that you don't make it die 1,000 deaths because of minutia. That would be very, very helpful to the instructor that you're training. But that's the role of a commentary, or the role of rubrics as well, to be able to give that kind of guidance to the EPPs. And that takes time to do that. The other issue that I appreciate Rep Wright's observation, that what we have now isn't working. But keep in mind, over half our educators don't come from Oregon EPPs. And we have a real crisis right now. And that's the other thing you've got to keep in mind. When you put these standards together, are you going to add barriers that are going to make it impossible to recruit teachers? So, I'm hopeful that you can do both. That we can have a really, really strong set of standards, but also that we will be able to recruit teachers. Because what we're doing, as I understand it, is we are putting these standards into place for all elementary multiple subjects students, whether they're teaching 6th grade or whether they're teaching 3rd grade. They need to know this. They need to know how to do this. And so we've got to figure out how to do it in such a way that we're not going to end up with even more crises with regard to having teachers in the state of Oregon.
I agree with that.
And that may be a parking lot issue, Susan. I don't know.
Yeah, it may be. I feel like where we are right now is we need to figure out what needs to be done, who's going to do it, a timeline, and that's my sense of where we are now.
I like the idea of somebody coming in and editing and making sure that redundancies aren't there. That's going to help. And then maybe, the EPP representatives on this council, and I'm happy to be involved in that, can maybe figure out, what really is going to work for the EPPs and what will work for TSPC. These are not TSPC standards. They're your standards. They're your program standards as a council, representing the governor's wishes. So they may be different, and from what we've done in the past. But I do think it's important to have some basic guidelines with regard to having some kind of an introduction that talks about what the scope is of these particular program standards. Who does it apply to? What are the basic licensure requirements we're going to talk about later at some point in the future? But who are the people that need to complete this kind of a program to be qualified? And maybe you add other things like the idea that you include the multitasking standards, include the Oregon Early Literacy Framework, things like that. in that, and make those things do that work for you in terms of being a reference that has more detail. And maybe there are other resources that you would include that would do the work for the standards. And it's understood that the standard includes using those approaches. So that's another way to cut down on size.
Thank you, Wayne. So Pooja, I'm wondering, and oh, you just did this. Okay. So Pooja, I'm just wondering from the governor's office perspective, you know, we have some very clear deadlines and timelines and, you know, I know that Rhonda and I got a query yesterday from one of the EPPs saying, we hear something's about ready. When are we going to see it? So there is anticipation, there is interest. So what are your recommendations or thoughts, Pooja, about next steps in all these questions that are coming up?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, as someone who isn't an educator, I am just like super thrilled with the discussion today and the hard work to get to these draft, recommendations that you've put in. I mean, you all are wrestling with, it sounds like exactly the right questions. And so you all are really in the weeds of it. I'm just like coming out of it from an outsider, and I'm just like amazed and in awe with the level of quality of work. So even if it feels really messy and not where you want it right now, I'll just say like this is actually very typical in advisory group processes, especially when you're trying to align something that is now to what a framework looks like. And so the template that you were provided was really designed to help you center in what the executive order really says, which is recommendations that are aligned to the literacy framework. So that was kind of a tool for you to help get to this stage. And now it seems like the next step in the sausage making is, okay, so we've done that kind of preliminary work. It doesn't need to look exactly in the same format in order to be aligned to the framework. So we've needed to go through the literal process of aligning to the framework in order to get to this place. But now is the next step to say, we don't need to be so literal in the next phase, just because we want to make sure that they're coherent, cohesive, and aligned to how TSBC standards and formats, are. So I think like, while you might be wrestling with some of these really important questions that are fair, I just want to give kudos to all of you for the great work that you have been doing so far. And I would say from the governor's perspective, you all are doing exactly the right work in accordance to the deadlines. And so I think it's totally fine and acceptable and align with the intent of the executive order to be in the phase that you are today. So I think that based on this conversation, the key essential questions that I'm hearing are what I put in the chat, and I'll read them for the record too, which is 1, who should decide the format and structure of the recommendations? 2, who should review and edit all of the work that you've done according to that format? And 3, it seems like you want a review process to check to make sure that you don't lose the intent and the spirit of this conversation and all the conversations you've had leading up to this point, just so that there's kind of multiple eyes on it to make sure that we don't lose some critical pieces. It seems like those are the 3 critical questions. Does that sound right to you? Those are the questions? Okay. Great. So with that, maybe we just go question by question and try to see what we can come up with. And I'll let the staff team from the agencies to also come on camera as well to support as needed with any questions that kind of come up. But in regards to that first question of who decides the format and structure of the recommendations, I've heard some, examples of, we have other states that we've looked at. Should we look at other states' formats? Should we look at how TSBC typically formats? That's a decision point that some group probably needs to make. And so one option is that we could have a small staff team from the agencies, from different agencies, combined with some council members to start to wrestle with those questions. Or it could be a volunteer group of council members, or it could be staff team coming back to council members. So just some options for you to consider. Any gut checks on either one of those few options or an additional option? Go ahead, Dr. Archer.
I should just suggested that we have different options already displayed. If there was one that we could utilize to fit into that we're already utilizing, that would be the easiest way to get into structure.
I really think that a lot of other states have put some thought into designing the structure to look a little differently. And I think that we should make sure that we're looking to a couple of different ideas.
Great.
And not just relying on kind of how we've always written them, the way they're formatted.
I totally agree with that, Jennifer, because the states have very different models, and we could go through and say which one do we think meets what we have been talking about. That would work well.
So who should do that? Do you want to create a work group that kind of does the decision point of what the structure is? Is that a council subgroup?
Can I ask first what the timeline is?
If it's
I
next
mean,
week.
it's like,
It's next week. I'm out. No, I'm kidding.
No, I think that it would be good to use the January 22nd council meeting that you already have to kind of do some work between today and that meeting to kind of get this in a form that you all are comfortable with, so that we can begin that January meeting with you all having time to review the revision ahead of time, and then coming out of that meeting to kind of get some decisions. Does that feel
in
reasonable?
terms of format, or in terms of format and editing?
Both.
Okay.
wow. So I would assume it will take a while to find an editor. Will somebody be looking into that immediately, and then do we have volunteers for a subgroup to look at the formatting, or how do you want to proceed?
Which one of these things should come first? The editing or the format?
The format needs to come first, I think.
Yeah,
We
but
need
at
to make a
this-
decision about that.
Probably at the same time, though, you need to be looking for the editor.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
So
'cause
that's-
it needs to go to the editor right after that.
Yeah.
As soon as we have a structure decided, then we can have them put it into that structure. Is that, Pooja, something you feel like the team, once we've decided on a structure, the team that you have could put them into the structure? Or do we need to be looking to hire someone?
I don't know if Dr. Archer, it seemed like you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, it seems like an agreement that we need a format and an editor, and that it should be a small group of people who want to organize that. That maybe we could even meet, a small group could meet on structure, and then we could have a meeting before the 22nd to say, well, how do you like this structure? And we've got these people, and go forward with that.
Yeah.
We need to be farther along in the process. With the holidays coming up, that complicates things too. But I'm wondering if we could have a subgroup that worked on choosing a structure, can we do like a remote vote, or somehow get
Okay.
consensus from the group without an actual meeting?
Particularly if we agree that we're going to look at other states and pick out our favorites and like have 4 that we vote on. Which one do you like?
Yeah.
Are there any other perspectives on that, that proposal? Go ahead, Director Cannon.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit because it seems to me that the structure, the form that these take should flow from the purpose that they have. And if the purpose of this set of recommendations is to direct or guide TSPC in pretty specific elements of rulemaking, then the structure that the recommendations take may look different than if the purpose is primarily as a communications tool to a larger set of audiences about this sort of spirit and intent and purpose. So my sense is that there's some of both, right? But that feels like something that might require some advisement by this group or by a subgroup. I guess I'm just, if I were trying to figure out what structure they should take, I want to know at the outset, like, well, what is our primary goal here? And I think I've operated under the sense that we're really trying to advise TSPC, right, the commission, in how to adopt rules, right? And that in my mind, that's a question that should be heavily informed by TSPC staff, by EPPs that will be the subject of the rules, and that's a sort of a different task than a broader communications document.
All these states had the same requirements. They were to direct their teacher practices and standards committee, and so that, I don't know, that is such a major challenge. I think that we are hoping to really advise the teachers' practices and standards versus have them direct us.
Then my recommendation would be that this work to turn the existing work of the council into a document that's useful to TSPC should really lean heavily on staff who are versed in rule writing and sort of the effect of rule making, or are the sort of recipients, the readers of rules, and in this case that would be EPPs. I mean, to me that feels like it's a very sort of mechanical. There's a certain sort of form that those typically take, but maybe this is not a helpful path to walk down.
I think it's an important point of context, and perhaps Wayne, maybe this would be a good time for you to share a reminder. You talked a little bit about the subcommittee process in October to this council, but if you could maybe just give us a reminder and go into a little bit more detail about when the council kind of completes its advisory work related to the standards, there is another layer of review and technical work, in my understanding, that the subcommittee of the TSPC commission would do. So could you tell us a little bit about that so we can figure out what we don't need to worry about in this group?
Sure. Once you have developed the program standards, then we have an obligation under law to submit that to our Rules Advisory Committee. And the Rules Advisory Committee staff will tweak the standards to make sure that it's in a format that fits Oregon law. And then they will also submit that to the general public for review for a 1 month period, for 30-day period. They will come back and we will submit that to the subcommittee of the commission that deals with program standards, and they will then forward that on to the full commission for approval. So there is going to be attention that will be paid to the formatting with regard to the OARs. That will happen.
So part of what I heard, Wayne, correct me if I'm wrong, is that some of the work that the TSPC commission subcommittee will do is to kind of take the more maybe more edited versions of what, and consolidated versions of what the group worked through today, and they would kind of translate it into the technical standards language, correct?
No, the Rules Advisory Committee is not equipped to do that. So they are going to, as best they can without disturbing the content, they're going to frame it in the style that will fit our OARs, OAR 584, our TSBC standards and statutes. But in terms of really editing the content, that's not going to happen.
Excellent. Good. No.
Yeah, it would be it would be problematic to try and do that without the content experts there.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, so I think typically we would have a subcommittee or a work group that's facilitated by a TSBC staff member. And typically that's like Wayne or someone on Wayne's team that's familiar with drafting things in OAR language, supported by content experts that are actually putting the content into the format that the TSBC staff sort of outlines. And I know that, you know, ODE and HEC also have standards that they are comfortable and familiar with. So that could be a step that we add to the process, is that a TSBC staff member puts it into the format that we would recommend, and then it comes back to this committee for review.
It's never just the staff member. It's always a work group that includes EPP, K-12 practitioners that are able to do that kind of work. I really would feel very fearful about having a staff person do that work without having a group to work with. Now, that group could be people that are part of this council, working in concert with a staff person. And you've got several EPPs represented here. So that would be a possibility.
Seems that we would want to be certain that our work is done from our vision of it before it was made into another situation, so that we could preserve the content. Because I really loved you saying that, Wayne, is that your goal is not to remove the content, but I just think that that's really critical, because the content now has not led to readers. And we can't change, we have to keep to the content that is likely to make the most difference for children.
So, yes, I think that there's no desire on the part of TSBC to change the content that has been put together by the council. In fact, you as a council are mandated to put together the program standards. So they can help to do minor edits, to do framing of it in a style that fits our rule, so that we are able to enforce that with the EPPs. But there would not really be, it would really not be wise to do any major edits of what you are doing.
Wayne, if there's a style that's already in place, can we not be informed about that? So if we had a subgroup that was going to get it in that style, because that's not what, I don't know that yet. I'm unaware of what is the current style that is necessary.
Yeah. I shared with you a sample earlier.
Yeah, but that's...
and I could share that with you if you want to take a look at that and consider that. It does not have the content. It has some sample content, but certainly it would give you at least a template for doing that.
So Dr. Williams had her hand up before. Dr. Williams, did you want to say something?
I'm just trying to track. And so what I think I hear is Wayne articulating that TSBC can do like the surface edit for formatting purposes for rulemaking. We still need to identify how we want to do the deep edits that we think the document still needs to do now. And so far, it sounds like we are going to select a work group out of this group that will meet prior to the 22nd to do that deep edit or to identify the structure. That's why I'm just trying to figure out where we are and understand what Wayne was saying in terms of we need an editor, but TSBC doesn't edit, but they do put it in a format, just tracking.
So I'm generally hearing that we want to have a group comprised of folks from this council that would work perhaps in tandem with TSPC, but that TSPC would be there really to just kind of provide, some general thoughts about structure, not about content. And so maybe is that where we are now, that we want to think about who is interested in being on that work group? The timeline sounds like before our next meeting that we would want to have those recommendations. Am I tracking all of that correctly? So thoughts about people who might be interested in being on such a work group?
I would work on that. And Katie isn't here, and I think Dr. Esparza Brown no, she's still on here. I really like the idea of it having our early literacy experts, folks who are working in the field, and that being part, just so we keep that content consistent. Shanaz, I saw you had your hand up. Yeah.
No, I agree.
Not to talk. I was just saying I would be interested and willing to work in that group.
Thank you.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, I think I got Anita, Rep Bowman, Shawnaz, Rhonda. Was there anybody other hands? Julie, are you raising your hand like you're interested or you have a question?
I am interested. I am just concerned about the timeline. This is, finally our break. And then the new term starts in January. So what's the deadline for this portion then?
So I think we want to get to something more cohesive by the next meeting, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, but that's the 22nd. So, but I thought what I heard was that we would have an editor before then and that we would have really have a draft by then. Is that not the case? So if we have a month to do this, then that's manageable, but.
And I guess I don't know if we've ever settled on the editor piece or whether this group would help do that. I don't know if that was decided. And I know, Ken, you had your hand up too.
My only recommendation, at the risk of stating the obvious, is that there's some ODE staff as well as part of that work group, just given how closely the recommendations are right now to the content of the framework, just to provide that perspective.
Was that you volunteering yourself?
It looks that way, but yes, we'll ensure to have ODE staff as part of that.
If I could just take a couple of minutes and share with you, again, just to kind of give you a sense for the template that we would follow at TSBC.
And Wayne, you said some of the standards are more detailed depending on the section and area.
Yeah, if you look at a program like the ESOL program, the state-specific standards dealing with ESOL, they're pretty involved. They're still not as involved as the standards that you're talking about. But let me just kind of share with you. Usually there's going to be an introductory section. Candidates, we use the term candidates because they're in a program at the university level. They will demonstrate knowledge, skills, professional dispositions, cultural competencies. If you want to, amend that to just the two categories you mentioned, that's fine. And these are kind of the general provisions for that. And then under point B, a requirement for candidates to complete the commission-approved test. in early literacy? Is that going to be involved? Is that going to be something that you're going to require in the standards? Are they going to be required to do a teacher performance assessment, clinicals? And then here's where you get into the standards. Standard on literacy development, standard on oral language and reading, standard on culture as an asset, reading models, core instruction, assessment. And I think our group just decided they did not want to separate out assessment from the core instruction. And then standard 7, demonstrate knowledge of the history of early literacy and multiple models to approach early literacy. Standard 8, demonstrate the ability to use information technology, which is not something I've heard talked about. So maybe you won't have that in your thing, but this is kind of the structure that's used for that. So you're going to have a bit more lengthy exposition under each one to cover all the points that need to be covered to your satisfaction. But that's kind of the way it would be organized, and this would be done with the help of our Rules Advisory Committee chair.
So Wayne,
Sorry, can you just put a link to that in the chat?
Yeah, I can send it to you. I mean, it's
Okay,
just a
good.
draft.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I'll send it to Pooja. Is that the best thing to do? And then she can get it to you or to the co-chairs?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay. And again, keep in mind, this is not going to necessarily have the content that you want. I just kind of did it to give you kind of an idea of the format that we have been using. And if you decide that format hasn't been working, I mean, that's your decision. But at any rate, that's what we're doing so far.
All right, Julie, I see your hand up first and then Anita.
Whoops, I forgot to lower it.
Okay, Anita.
so my concern just reading those is how general they are and leading to interpretation and not having the content that has research base.
So
But I see the structure, how you're doing it.
That's
but
what he was showing,
content-
structure.
Yeah, and that's all I intend for you to get out of this, Anita. You supply the content. That's what I'm afraid that I don't want TSBC doing that, because you can change a word or a phrase and change the whole meaning
Right.
of a standard. So it has to be done very carefully. So I'm not trying to address that issue of content.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes left, and I want to just recap what I've heard, that the following folks have expressed interest in being on this work group: Anita, Rep Bowman, Shawnaz, Rhonda, Julie, Esparza Brown, and Ken from ODE. And
I can also.
I'm sorry, who
Is it
else?
if you want to add me, Jen.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer.
And
Rep
Rep
Bowman.
Wright, not Rep Bowman.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's why I shouldn't be writing things on a Friday afternoon. Okay.
I've got it too, don't worry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And so the timeline is to try and condense. I would think, Pooja, can we count on the governor's office to find out about an editor and get back to that working group as soon as possible?
Sure.
Okay. And then the timeline is to have that editor work with folks in that working group, and we'll expect to see something by our January 22nd meeting.
That's our aim. Yep.
Okay.
So I guess my question with that is, who's taking leadership on this subcommittee so that we can get the work done?
Yeah, like, can someone send out a poll, to find a work time?
Yeah.
Pooja, can your office help with that? Just to get people organized?
I can certainly have our team get organized. I wonder if there's somebody from the council who would just kind of like to chair the work group from the council that is not a state employee, just to make sure that it is driven by experts who are in literacy, such as co-chair Fritz, for example. So I just defer to you all and who you want to delegate on that end.
Rhonda, do you feel comfortable?
I ask a question of Pooja? the time it takes this, is there no possibility of having remuneration for someone on the council who's doing all this work?
I will have to get back to you on that.
I mean, it's not for me, someone else who might end up, I mean, it's really lots of hours and hours and hours.
I am comfortable chairing, Susan, so I can do some organization of that group. Pooja, if you'll just send me, I tried to write down, but I'm doing the same thing Susan is, and
I got it. Don't worry.
All right, thank you.
And Rhonda, I'm happy to help be a silent kind of, advice for the TSPC perspective on that, if you need me.
Yes, that would be really helpful. And did we get someone from ODE that was willing to work with us on that?
It was
Okay.
Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
He was exuberant.
And you know what's interesting is we already saw the format.
Mm-hmm.
So we have one question down. I mean, if that's the format that they use and we can all agree to that, then we can go right to the editing possibilities before we even have an editor.
Yeah. Yeah, and the consolidation within that format, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And
If you're comfortable with that, and I hope you are, I mean, because if you're not, then that's a lot more work for us as well once we get involved in it. So
the format was beautiful. I just needed more specificity.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think
Just
we can
showing the
provide that.
Mhm. Okay, so we are near our wrap-up time. Any other lingering things from anybody we have not heard from recently? Sean Haas.
Just a-
sorry,
just
I
a
just
question
need-
for those people who would like to share their contact information in case we get going or down the road, that actually we could communicate with one another other than here if people are interested.
And I'm guessing Pooja, the governor's office can help with that piece too. The organizational and structural communication stuff like that.
Yeah, and we have had shared bios that have contact information, so I just put the link in the chat just so you have it handy again, because that is out there.
Thank you.
Sean Haas is next.
I just wanted some clarification around, or when do we come back to the parking lot issue of the language of instruction and dual language programs in the foundational skills section? It's just it's honestly the difference between on the fist to five, a 5 and a fist for me. So I just want to know when we can revisit that. It may not seem like a big deal, but in the context of dual language, it's really, really a big deal.
Well, I think that's something that this subcommittee could tackle.
Okay.
Especially as you're on there, so that
Okay.
helps us to kind of talk through that and how it might work.
Perfect.
In language.
Good recommendation. Okay, we are now out of time. Thank you all. Hope you have some time for rest and happy holidays if you celebrate. Otherwise, thank you all for all your great work.
Thank you.